Hello and welcome to another Let's Play. Me, GamerWolfSix, Sileo, Tales of a New Dawn. Before we start, if you're interested in playing this game, you can get it free on itch.io. But if you want to support the people that make this game and or get the newest version earlier, you can go to their Patreon, which is $5 a month, $54 a year. So, on the last Let's Play, we were falling asleep when our phone started vibrating, and it turned out to be not Axel, Dom the fox, who said Eureka, because he found out that in a certain area over like the course of many years, there's this one area of Woodcrest that satellite photos have a cloud over, always the same cloud. And that is the address of the house that was broken down, or demolished. But, yeah, he was busy, so we went by ourselves to investigate, and yes, there is a premises here. So, we walked around the premises, checked the doors, couldn't find any way in, checked the doors again, and then one of them is open. So now, we're breaking and entering. Or at least entering? I'm not sure, I think it's breaking and entering. Yeah, anyways. Oh, of Spencer's house. Most likely. He was probably a vampire. Closing the door behind me, I held position for several moments, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Besides the sounds of the torrential downpour outside and the occasional boom of furious thunder, the interior of the manor was suspended in deathly silence. Gradually, more and more detail in my environment came into view as my eyes continued to adjust, and very quickly, a major detail regarding my surroundings became all too clear. 2 piping hot cups of tea. It's abandoned. I ventured inward, dutifully closing the door behind me, as the oppressive darkness entombed me in its suffocating void. In fear of a visibly related injury, I stood in place, waiting patiently for my eyes to slowly adjusted to the manor's dim interior. I began with the large silhouettes, gradually progressing to the smaller and more intricate details. It quickly became evident that somebody certainly lived here, even if that person wasn't necessarily who we thought it was. Opposite the entry, I saw 2 chairs deliberately positioned a short distance from the unlit fireplace. Surrounding the fireplace, lining each and every vertical surface of the room, spare for the dark passageway in the opposite corner, were a series of towering wooden bookcases. Each and every bookcase was filled to the brim with all manner of material, a mix of paperbacks mixed with hard covers. Some books had no covers whatsoever, while others sat on top of the others, perched horizontally. Sorry, reading odds. It just always happens. Perched horizontally in the remaining vertical space of their specific shelf. It was an impressive collection, although, in such a dimly lit scenario, I couldn't make out what kinds of books they were. Despite that, I could see that some were very, very large, and some very, very old indeed. For a moment, I considered lighting the fire to dry myself off before coming to my senses. Surely, there would have been no better way to blow my cover, although the constant dripping of water from my drenched attire wasn't much better. I only hoped they would... Looking downward revealed a bizarre phenomenon. Despite looking like a drowned dog only moments ago, both my fur and my clothing were now bone dry. Stranger yet, I hadn't noticed until now. What manner of? ? Before me, the emergence of a bizarre, almost otherworldly light caught my focus. A glow of an almost lime green, which emitted from the light right-hand chair, drew my attention to an object which sat in its distinctly worn cushion. Okay, so 2 things. 1, we were falling asleep. So this could, sleep de deprivation. So, well, maybe not sleep deprivation because that's a specific term, but this could be a dream or magic or aliens. I don't know. It would be interesting if aliens just came down and was like, though. I don't know. Since this subject seems to bring in like this doomsday stuff, I wonder if they're going to be like, hey, there's this thing where maybe it's going to be something where it's like, hey, Spencer's an alien here to, solve the mystery of why people are becoming infertile and gay. It was strange, yet very different, difficult to put into words. But that strange green glow, it had something of a soothing effect. A soothing effect which contrasted my own feelings, bringing the sheer gravity of the situation into focus. But I shouldn't be here. This was a bad idea. I should go. I should. I panicked slightly, the foolishness of this endeavor clearer than it ever had been. Why had I come here? It had been such a stupid move, one I haven't even questioned. Instead, merely given in to the pain and desperation. Strangely, there was some kind of shift in the object's glow. It was almost as if the object had responded to how I'd been feeling. It just didn't approach to compensate. I felt reassured. It was nothing short of bizarre, almost as if the object was telling me not to be afraid. Tell me that I would come to no harm. A trap, surely? To lull me into a false sense of security? No, not a trap. I was welcome here? I don't understand. I approached the object, its glow fading as I reached down to pick it up. It was a photo frame of some sort that had sat face down in the chair. Curious, I flipped it over. Birds. It was a photograph taken of what looked like an ornate oil painting, reminiscent of the works produced by famed historic artists. The painting depicted two individuals, the first of which was a familiar-looking raven, whose beak seems a bit shorter. Both the raven and his companion were distinctly antiquated attire, reminiscent of something of an old-timey tale. Despite being a painting, something about those outfits struck me in a rather intriguing way. Now, granted, the clothes seem somewhat similar. Black pants, black jackets, red thing. I always liked black on red, Specifically, outfits like this usually look cheap, like costumes they always were. At least, always until now. Even through the artist's lens, it was clear that these outfits were no mere imitations. A quality movie prop, perhaps? I hadn't known Spencer to be the theatrical sort. Though the same could not be said of his companion, a parrot whose brilliant green plumage rendered his darker companion dull and lifeless by contrast. His handsome face adorned with a bright and seemingly genuine smile. If he were an actor, his looks alone would have made a household name, which is precisely why I knew that this is no act. His smile was so real, and so is his outfit, and the implications of that were difficult to process. I see you have met Artemis. I turned in place, the photo frame still clutched careful in hand. I guess his beak is the same length. Whether it was Spencer's silvery tone or some sort of effect of the painting, I did not know. But I wasn't afraid. After all, I had no reason to be, right? I mean, you aren't breaking and entering and, I don't know, spooky stuff. But he seems nice. I do apologize if my arrival startled you. I had intended to greet you sooner, but encountered some difficulties with my arrival. It's been a long time since I've done this, you see. Hmm? What do you mean by this exactly? Forgive me. I have barely spoken 2 words, and yet I'm already getting ahead of myself. Despite appearances, I would have you know that I am quite the chatterbox. Thus, when the rare opportunity to speak with somebody unabated presents itself, I am all too inclined to make the most of it. Although I would kindly ask for your patience, there's a lot for us to cover, and many of your questions will be addressed in short course. Thankfully, time has no meaning in this place, or has no meaning. We're free to take as long as we wish without consequence. What do you mean by this place? Well, in any normal environment, your clothing and fur would not magically dry itself now, would it? And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe this is not your first visit. Not my first visit? What do you... I could very much be mistaken, and if so, please accept my apologies. But the first day we met, you saw me in a dream, did you not? A dream? More like a terrifying nightmare. How'd you know about that? Experience, you could say. Although, I did not know this at the time. Certain concerns brought this possibility to my attention. But apologies. I know I appear to be speaking in riddles. It is as I said. There is much for us to cover. All will become clear in time. But why? Isn't this supposed to be some big secret? Indeed, but I simply cannot live with the pain my secret has caused. For you, for Ty, I have already broken Ty's heart once. I refuse to be responsible for it a second time. So, you're a thing? Then, wait, you two are a thing? Then, who's this Artemis? The best friend I ever had, my constant companion, my soulmate. I'm certain he would have liked you. It would seem that he agrees. Huh? Spencer chuckled warmly, amused by Artemis's reaction. I didn't understand. Artie began his eternal rest some 100 years past, in a time that predated photography, as I'm certain you have already surmised. As for Ty and me, well, it was considerably more recent, although similarly a fragment of the past, as difficult as that can be to admit sometimes. It is a long story, and there is much you must come to understand for the truth that you seek to make sense. I should warn you in advance. You will learn things about the nature of your being for which you might find ignorance preferable. But I know well enough that that will not stop you, and in truth, we both strive for the very same thing. Thus, it would behoove you to accompany me on this journey. We are presented with a very rare and golden opportunity. Instead of merely telling you these things, you must know, I can show you. You say as though our encounter is unexpected. Well, somewhat, yes. I had anticipated your visit, but had not anticipated your slumber. And now, we both share this dream. Okay, so I am sleeping? I fell asleep? It would seem so. I do hope you are not getting too wet. Is you asleep outside the building? Now, your questions will be answered in due course. But as for here and now, is there anything specific you have yet to comprehend? Yeah. Why do you have a photograph of a painting? My, so many things you could have asked. Instead, you critique my decorative choices. But humor aside, I have very little to remember Artie by. That painting is the only thing I have left beyond my own memories. I keep the original sealed away somewhere safe. Spencer had mentioned that the painting depicted a time before photography, If that was indeed him in the painting, then... I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone, now similarly bone dry, just like my clothing. I scrolled through the messages to find what I was looking for. A sepia-tone photograph came into view. I showed this to Spencer in support of my next question. What about this? Are you Sebastian du Virx Monde too? Spencer's bright smile lit up the room, his heartfelt delight unmistakably genuine. That line looks familiar for some reason. Is this you? Indeed. I forgot how handsome Edwin was when he was young, and I could never resist Mason's smile. I miss those gentlemen dearly. What happened? Same as ever. Time did as is won't do. Nobody lives forever. It's like, whatever happened to him is like, you do realize that was 300 years ago. Or are you asking, how did they die specifically? Even you? Even me. Although it may not seem that way. Though it is true that I am unusually long-lived, the photograph is nearly 100 years old now. Both Edwin and Mason have been gone for about half as long. 50 years. It was around when the manor was supposed to be demolished, right? Signed for by one Solomon Moreau. Indeed, I had retired as Sebastian years prior. By that time, Mason had already left us, and Edwin's once golden mane had turned to pure white. My own relatively unchanged appearance had made it far too difficult to explain why. So did he say it's dead? Okay. He's just saying he's long-lived, not dead. Many of my responsibilities as founding mayor were handled to local government, but some were passed down to Solomon, fulfilling those obligations through trusted proxies and keeping a low profile. Eventually, Solomon would retire in such the same way, and thus Spencer would take on the role. I knew it. Spencer was a pseudonym too. But then, what is your real name? A question I have been asked many times, yet one I struggle to answer. I suppose it all comes down to, what do you believe makes a name real? Okay, fair enough. What about the name your parents gave you? I'm afraid I had no parents to speak of. If it is not already evident, I am like you, or Ty, or anybody else. Unlike Artemis? No, Artemis and I are alike. Then, where did this name come from? He chose it. In his studies of culture and mythology, he studied ancient religions and their deities. He took a liking to the name Artemis. Always said it rolled off the tongue far more nicely than Six. Six? His name was a number? Indeed, the name goes for us all. I was 9. And no, I did not choose the name, but Artemis chose one for me. A name that stuck with me, whether I liked it or not. A name which I was known for many long years. I suppose a reintroduction is in order. Hello, Adrian. My name is Apollo. I am pleased to make your acquaintance. Spencer delivered his introduction with a gracious and cordial bow. I responded with a smile, matched immediately by his already bright expression. Now then, my dear friend, shall we make a start? There's very much left to cover. I still had questions. Many questions, in fact. But I trusted Apollo. I trusted that Apollo would answer them all in time. Alright, where to first? Apollo beckoned towards the door in the corner of the room, opposite from where I entered. In the context of what I had learned since, it was now obvious that this was no ordinary door at all. Is this going to be kind of like the Forgotten City? Like, kind of spoiler alerts. But, you know, mystical stuff. Almost solid black. The solid black expanse beyond wasn't merely darkness. It was a rift. Walking through the store would take me somewhere. Somewhere of Apollo's choosing. Was this really such a good idea? I held the frame up once more, admiring Artemis's brilliant plumage, and its distinctive green glow began to illuminate the room once more, gifting me courage and reassurance. I felt compelled to bring Artemis with me on this journey for reasons I could neither explain nor comprehend. It was almost as though he wanted to come along, a request I wholeheartedly obliged. I approached the doorway as Apollo remained in place, his warm smile unwavering as he patiently waited for me to proceed. Up close, the darkness beyond the door had substance and weight. Admittedly, I was a little terrified of stepping through it. Thankfully, I would not be doing it alone, and so I was determined that nothing would stand in my way. I'd learned the truth, and at this point, I didn't much care if I died trying. So, aliens, gods, otherworldly creatures? Well, I guess that would be aliens. Were only so simple to tell you the truth. Alas, experience notes that a comprehensive explanation is in order. Truth is oft stranger than fiction, and words lacking appropriate context are little more than just words. Our tale begins with the conclusion of the terminal death rattle of our forebearers, a species whom our very existence was predicated. Death gives way to new life, as is the perpetual cycle of mortality. Theirs is often presented as a fable of sorts, a cautionary tale, warning of the follies of short-sighted and stubborn and the greedy. Is a tale taught from a young age in each and every classroom the world order. Okay, these look like robots, though I could have also thought there were people in the background. I, of course, refer to the ill-fated tenure of the once mighty human race. In a sense, we are fortunate that their failures had become our lessons, informing our trajectory as a species in order that we may yet avoid repeating their mistakes. Sadly, it would seem that we have far more in common than with our forebears than perhaps we would like to admit. Perhaps such an outcome is preordained. Perhaps we are doomed to fail again and again. Another bitter cycle, kept recurrent so long as we're given the opportunity to try. The beginning of their end was marked by the emergence of a war spanning all four corners of the globe. A war whose gravity was so immense that there were no bystanders. I swear I can read. So basically this is Fuga, minus the big tank. Those without allegiance would swiftly be erased, their lands serving little more as open positions in the murderous game of military chess. It was a conflict founded on a difference of ideologies, fueled by assertions that their way of life was the ultimate gospel. Naturally, a claim mirrored on all sides, sharing a sense of veracity in common, or, better said, a lack thereof. Long before the war began, each nation had succeeded in cultivating a culture where pride is one's nation passion for supremacy was not only commonplace, but considered a core component in being an upstanding citizen. I can read. Those who dared to question the status quo expressed doubt in the integrity of their nation, or even go so far suggesting that their lives were not quite as good as they were expected to believe. These people were shunned, reviled, and treated with disgust. Of course, these individuals were quite simply indoctrinated, something those same individuals would feverishly and aggressively refute, so deeply entangled in their blind ignorance that any differing perspective was both unfathomable and irrefutably wrong. Both sides fought beneath their flags, proud of their nations and confident in their righteousness. But is spilling the blood of one's sworn enemy in the name of your nation truly so righteous? Murdering one's fellow man in the name of some fickle allegiance, does that sound so righteous? So long as the masses were willing to take up arms, righteousness was akin to little more than the strings of a marionette, puppeteered by those with no concern for such trivialities. In truth, those pulling the strings were did so of self-interest, born from the desire to extend their reach and bolster their power. Year after year, they sent the young, the foolish, and the patriotic into the meat grinder, facing certain death, while their puppet masters remained safe behind their fortified walls, their pockets growing ever deeper, and so too their influence, as their hands grew blackened by endless blood. It does sound familiar. So is the bureaucracy of selfish and the indifference, little more than the twisted visage of feudalism, predicated on the misguided belief that their nation and their way of life were absolute, the one true force of good, in an otherwise twisted and evil world. And so, the war raged on, a war whose death toll soon numbered in the billions, a feat achieved in a mere 2 decades of conflict. Of course, this presented something of a dilemma to those in power. You cannot fight a war without soldiers, thus both sides found a solution. Peace was never even a consideration. Not so much left for those in power yet to gain. Instead, each side pursued an alternative means to shore up their numbers and ensure the perpetuity of their conflict. Perpetuity. One side, a nation renowned for its technological prowess, constructed legions of automata, unthinking, unfeeling machines with an unmatched efficiency and a ruthless, single-minded determination for executing their enemy. The opposition, a nation whose aptitude for genetic sciences was second to none, instead cloned the most decorated and successful of their existing forces en masse, using DNA samples mandatorily collected at the time of conscription. Unfortunately for them, this nation, whom for brevity's sake, I will refer to as the Coalition, quickly found themselves at a rather substantial disadvantage. While their clone units could be produced cheaply and en masse, they were no match for the catastrophic lethality of their enemy's automata. A lone machine capable of making quick work of multiple large hostile units entirely unassisted. The Coalition had an advantage in their numbers, but it became absurdly clear that the sheer disparity in combat efficiency would promptly become their undoing. They knew that fighting fire with fire was a lost cause, their own technology incapable of matching that of the enemy, and thus, in their desperation, they doubled down on the only thing they had left, their genetics program. Time was an ill-afforded luxury as the balance of the war began to shift dangerously, prompting the Coalition to assemble an elite team of geneticists, comprising many of the brightest minds of the time. I can read. Their initial plan had been to fully reverse engineer the human genome, a process which had once been thought borderline impossible, more recently made feasible by major discoveries in the field. Alas, Even then, it would take time, more time than they had to spare. Without the complete sequence, simulating their modifications became difficult and unreliable. Trial and error became a major component of the research, a gruesome and wasteful process where experimental modifications would be tested on live, cloned specimens. More often than not, this process produced monstrous abominations that were disposed of all too quickly, but occasionally breakthroughs were made. Breakthroughs that offered the faint glimmer of hope that the war might not yet be lost. Several years had passed with countless catastrophic losses, pushing the coalition to the brink of defeat as the last of their forces retreated to the mainland to stage their final defense, while at long last the first batch of enhanced soldiers were deployed in their defense. The splicing of human DNA with that of wild animals was the brainchild of a young and brilliant scientist named Dr. Marsden. His attempt to integrate their forces with desirable traits sourced from the animal kingdom, and despite many hurdles along the way, his project was an overwhelming success. The resultant soldiers were faster, stronger, and more lethal than ordinary humans, with zero impact on their costs. And it was these prototype soldiers who were credited with a successful defense of their homeland. Dr. Marsden would quickly become the coalition's head of genetic science, and his team would go on to produce an array of specialized soldiers whose traits were carefully tailored for specific operations which pushed their enemies further still, restoring the balance to the ongoing war. But as the coalition's confidence in Marsden's program grew, so too did the extravagance of their demands. They wanted faster units, stronger units, smarter units. They wanted things that would cause significant discomfort among their troops, things that would rob them of their free will. In particular, one of the most significant requests was for a system designed to rival the communication abilities of even the automata. Every unit in the field formed a network establishing near instantaneous transmission of highly complex information. Every unit in the field transmitted comprehensive combat data, from their damage status to their ammunition count, and even target recognition data. All it took was a single unit to spot an enemy, and the whole unit would instantly engage in perfect tandem. Coalition attempts to crack the encryption medium had been entirely in vain, and attempts to interfere with or scramble the network had not fared much better. And so, the coalition deferred to Marsden, demanding a system that would override an individual's will, rendering them entirely at the mercy of their orders. And for the first time, Marsden refused. He was tired of playing God, and stripping his subjects of their autonomy was a line he would not cross, no matter what. The coalition responded by demoting him to an advisory position, making him a figurehead for all intents and purposes. The project would proceed unabated, using Marsden's research to develop a pheromone-based system capable of replicating a great deal of the required functionality and the limitations of what was possible in biological imitation of a digital creation. The system utilized purpose-built command units, who produced two separate pheromones, known colloquially as control and command. These commanders would be accompanied by newly upgraded drone units, and units who were capable to use susceptible to those chemical signatures. Exposure to the control pheromone would strip the drone of their inhibition and suppress their free will, rendering them obedient to all too willing to sacrifice themselves to see their orders fulfilled. The second of these pheromones, command, essentially worked as a rudimentary communication medium. Commanders would use commands and other important information in almost real time, practically negating the need for traditional means of communication. I wonder how fast pheromones can go, you know? In addition, exposure to the former of these two chemicals prompted replication of the very same pheromones in a drone, allowing groups of drones to form a network over greater distances and to redistribute commands, reaching units who would otherwise may have been out of the commander's range. It was an intricate and surprisingly effective system that once again corrected the tipping balance of the conflict. But to the now maturing Marsden, the coalition had crossed a line they simply could not accept. As time marched on, the more things changed, the more they only seemed to stay the same. Alas, there were constants from which Marsden could derive little comfort, as many more iniquitous implementations had only further twisted Marsden's great triumphs into more and more unrecognizable abominations. It had long become clear that neither side would accept anything less than an unconditional victory, yet neither side would tolerate defeat, and with both nations in possession of sizable nuclear arsenals, armed and ready to fire at any time, Marsden knew exactly how things would end. Not in victory, nor defeat, but in fire. A nation on the brink of defeat, launching a colossal payload of devastating nuclear weaponry, promptly repaid in full through mutual assured destruction. Marsden was certain of this outcome. There was no further future for his species, except for total annihilation by their own hand. But Marsden would not stand idly by, allowing this to spell the end of intelligent life on Earth. Instead, he resolved to atone for his many sins, enacting a contingency plan for when all else was lost. Over the years, Marsden had utilized what little authority he had left to pilfer resources, materials, and research from his employers. He worked slowly and carefully, taking great care not to arouse suspicion as he worked to assemble a lab of his own, until one small slip threatened the success of his plan. Forced into action, he defected in the dead of night, tucking himself away under his bunker where his employers couldn't find him. Within his bunker? His premature departure had robbed him of much of what he needed, but nonetheless had enough to begin his work and his goal. To give his creations, his children, the opportunity humanity had stolen from them. He would strip them of humankind's perverse alterations and restore them to a more natural state, granting them the existence of free will, happiness, and prosperity they were cruelly denied. Marsden had been correct. Only a few short years after his self-exile, the outside world was cleansed in almighty fire. At long last, the war had come to an end. Contrary to his perception, however, humanity proved more resilient than anticipated. Some yet survived, isolated in small pockets of inhabitable land between insurmountable barriers of lethal radiation. But humans had long lost the skills needed to survive in the wild. Their dependence on the conveniences of developed civilizations rendered them helpless victims to a cruel world that had been stripped bare of the resources needed to sustain them. What began in cooperation ended in conflict, as the eternal cycle humanity had once wrought. Some fell prey to the radiation, others to attrition, and the rest to one another. I wonder what crossed the last surviving human's mind as he took his final breath. Did he know he was the last of his kind? Did he believe that the legacy of man would die along with him? Marsden spent a decade after decade working tirelessly towards his goal. In his eyes, he had sinned. He twisted life and a perverse nature to better serve the interests of cruel and evil men who no longer drew breath. He could not forgive himself for the part he had played in their schemes. He could never forgive himself for giving so many the gift of life, so they might throw it away in the name of a nation they never knew, for a curse they never believed. Sorry. That could be curse either. For a promise of peace they would never know. And thus, he dedicated every last second he had left to his work, so that he might bequeath this earth to what he considered a more deserving heir, and that someday he might yet learn to forgive himself. His early departure had robbed him of the research required to dismantle many of the more complex alterations, forcing Marsden to resort to trial and error once more. Many a tear shed for each and every failed experiment, for each and every time he had to say goodbye. The years would take their toll as Marsden's frailty progressed. So too did his fear that his body would fail him before his work was complete. There's nothing more important than his work, nothing he would not do to see it through, even if his only shot at atonement required that he repeat the very mistakes that led him down the path to begin with. And so he began to work on an experimental line of clones, this time combining his existing work with the genetic code belonging to the Coalition's command units, whose unique adaptations provided a more suitable platform for the specific intent of his research. Born from this project came 12 highly experimental prototypes, each comparable in a great many ways, but nonetheless bearing their own unique solution to the very same problem. While the work Marsden had already completed allowed him a substantial head start, much of the hard work was still required to unravel the complex systems built into the commander's DNA systems that left to their own devices threatened the success of Marsden's plan. Already on borrowed time, Marsden maintained a delicate balance between the quality of his work and the pace with which it progressed. After several more years, the first of these creations drew its first breath. Their purpose? To pilot cutting-edge genetic research that would not only combat the effects of aging, but practically cease the onward march of time entirely. For all intents and purposes, these new prototypes were designed to be immortal. Alas, Marsden would quickly learn that despite the implied yet rudimentary success of his research, the immortality of his subjects came with an array of untold side effects, and even then, replicating the effect on an existing being had proven impossible. Marsden's only success was a means to delay the inevitable, to evade the cold grasp of decay for long enough. He hoped to see his purpose filled, and so he continued his work, and for the first time in several decades, he would not be doing so alone. His immortal companions were given a new meaning. The original purpose already served. Thus, it would become their duty to consume the vast archives of human knowledge that Marsden had achieved before joining their more transient siblings in cryostasis. Once they awoke, it would become their duty to act as shepherds and oracles to the new inhabitants of the earth, imbuing them with the secrets of human knowledge and teaching them the follies of their predecessors' demise. Each immortal had a range of subjects assigned to them, spending year after year expanding their knowledge, all the while supporting Marsden in his research as he fought against the inevitable, his body slowly wasting away. Nobody lives forever, but despite being the very last of his species, Marsden did not die alone. In fact, he did so surrounded by those who considered him a father, by those who he considered his children, those who put his concerns to rest, assuring him they had finished his work on time. I know what crossed the last surviving human's mind as he took his final breath. He knew that he was the last of his kind, but he also knew that because of his tireless efforts, the legacy of man would yet live on, giving rise to the very species they demanded die for them. Marsden left this planet with a rare and well-deserved smile. A man who at long last found his redemption. After all, his work had been completed, had it not? I was the one who uttered that lie, and I have no regrets. In truth, there was still work yet to be done. One by one, the immortals began their lengthy slumber, waiting for the day the outside world would once again become inhabitable. All that was, except for me. The geneticists among the immortals took up Marsden's mantle, sharing in his creator's desire to see the project come to fruition. Alas, as talented and well-learned as I was, his knowledge paled in comparison to Marsden's. Oh, I guess not him. Something that, in time, would come with a great many unexpected consequences. It was 6,000 years before the automated systems in the laboratory would initiate the thaw, starting first with the immortals and followed by hundreds upon hundreds of weird and wonderful species, all similarly confused and afraid of an unknown and foreign world. A head count of the immortals promptly revealed a discrepancy. Number 4, the geneticist, had never made it to cryostasis. Instead, he remained awake to watch over his brothers and sisters, to act as a warden, safeguarding Marsden's legacy. System logs revealed that it was not for his manual intervention and several seemingly propriety upgrades to lab systems. None of them would have awoken. He had saved everyone their lives, more than once. Everyone spare his own. Little remained other than dust. Having passed long, long ago, our continued survival was a testament to his work, but his demise was shrouded in mystery. Perhaps we are not so immortal after all. Emerging into an unfamiliar world, Earth's inheritors expected a harsh and icy mountains, but instead they emerged into a lush and idyllic valley whose natural geography made its devastating origin abundantly clear. The successive millennia decorating the once barren landscape with picturesque trees and icy clear lakes. From this location, the immortals divided their populations and spread across the four corners of the earth, forming fledgling civilizations and taking full advantage of the second chance Martians' work had afforded them. Of course, it would not be long before a series of dire flaws in the genetics of both the immortals and their chargers became painfully evident. In particular, the system responsible for genetic pheromones, a system which Marsden had attempted to dismantle, was still very much operational. This would have not been a problem, as the drones had been reworked to not be receptive to the pheromones in the first place. Yet, on occasion, the individual would exhibit telltale signs of exposure. Worse yet, maybe that's why a main character was getting all horny and stuff. While the control aspect still functioned exactly as intended, the command component did not. Instead, an immortal's consciousness was stemmed via these pheromones. Often including thoughts, memories, and emotions. Of those receptive to those pheromones, none of them could consciously perceive this information, but within their subconscious, they saw it all, and for those in states with the predisposition towards delusion, this information could seep in, causing untold events within the victim's mind. This occurred frequently in those with mental illness, such as schizophrenia, but for those receptive, the effects could easily be recognized in far more common states. Can you guess which? Indeed, the state of slumber, as you know all too well from first-hand experience. Okay, that would explain stuff. Though then why did we meet with, spookiness twice? As it would happen, an immortal's ability to not only control, but even perceive the information their pheromones could propagate had been rendered partially non-existent, though in a strange twist, the reins were handed back during their own states of slumber. Not particularly useful in and of itself, but in the presence of one receptive to the chemical signatures while both parties were asleep, a well-practiced and adept immortal could bend the perception, the dreamscape with their canvas and their will with a brush. Alas, exposure to these pheromones would achieve the intended impact of making the subject more obedient, stripping them of their inhibitions. Without a mortal to pilot them, they instead fell victim to their own base instincts, their primal whims, their carnal urges. Immortals were best to ration their presence, maintaining sufficient distance as to avoid the possibility of exposing an individual, and some of us did, overseeing our respective kingdoms and enacting our will via trusted proxies. But some had other plans. It did not take long for all of our group to fracture into opposing factions, disagreeing over the trajectory that our civilizations should take, our roles in those civilizations, and even disagreeing over Marsden himself. For some, he was like a father, but for others, he was little more than a meddling traitor. Dang. While Marsden was still alive, I had become close to another certain mortal who was designated as number 6. We all got along well, our mismatching personalities providing a sentiment that opposites attract, as our strengths covered the other's weaknesses and vice versa, forming a stronger, unified whole. His primary field of study were chemistry. His primary field of study was chemistry, botany, and herbology. However, he took an interest in topics of human religion and mythology. Alright, carry on. It is late, and studied these as a hobby. In particular, he found what was known as Greek mythology, from which he adopted the name Artemis. And despite many complaints, I was gifted the name Apollo. Although reluctant at first, against all odds, the name stuck. It was the name that my followers would come to know me by over the course of several thousand years. Sadly, when our groups divided, Artemis and I found ourselves on opposing sides of the conflict. I stood up for what I believed in, where Artemis's legions followed the path of the least bloodshed. He tried to protect his people by befriending those who would most threaten their well-being. I considered myself a servant to my people, and a benevolent source of knowledge and wisdom. I also fancied myself something of a higher power. My own inherent lack of greed, bias, and selfish desire forging a path untainted by human flaws. Couldn't we all have those kinds of rulers? I meant well, but I was foolish. I began to trust my own counsel more than anybody else. I became dismissive of others' opinions, dismissive of their thoughts and their feelings, and most crucially, dismissive of their warnings. I had been warned of a large army mobilizing the forest to the southeast of our kingdom, an army belonging to one of my fellow immortals, the very same Artemis had pledged his allegiance to, and had positioned himself as a deity among his people, demanding worship and sacrifice. An immortal who had trained his populace to treat those with exposure symptoms akin to how humans had once treated witches. Public executions were common, fueled by fox paranoia, deliberately spread to keep the public in fear, and obedient to their god, their once chance at salvation. It was all too familiar story, recalling the hubris which had once led to our forebears' demise. I believe, us worthy successors, I believe that we were better than that. I overanalyzed the circumstances, creating rationale where there was none, and applying reason to actions born from reckless overconfidence, and as a total lack of value of life. I convinced myself he had no reason to attack, nothing to gain by doing so. I convinced myself his armies had mobilized for other reasons. I convinced myself, and those who looked to me for guidance, that no harm would come to us. I was such a fool. They attacked in the dead night, massacred our armies as they slept, butchered the women and children, laid siege to my kingdom's walls, and burned it all to the ground. Artemis and I had once jokingly given Seven the name Hades, a deliberate prod at his dour and oftentimes standoffish demeanor. Little did he know that no name would better suit such a vicious and murderous conqueror. I would later learn that I was not the first of his fellow mortals whose kingdoms he razed. Neither would I be the last, as he lay waste to a nation after nation. His goal to prove his supremacy and unite the world under his banner, so he might elect himself as their god. As he stormed the palace grounds and executed everyone I held dear, I braced for the end, for his blade to strike me down. But death would not be so merciful. When he met me alone standing, the last known survivor of my kingdom, he merely sneered, before ordering his troops home. It was never about killing me. It was about asserting dominance, about taking everything I had, and leaving me to witness his ascent, and to suffer the grief of my loss. In the wake of my greatest failure, with no purpose left, I embarked on a nomadic life, venturing from place to place, my identity changing as often as the wind, never staying long enough in one place to risk exposing anybody and giving away my true identity. This continued for many long years, until one fateful day, I was visiting a small town on the coast of to the south, and, within a bustling tavern, our eyes locked. I recognized Artemis immediately, and he I. Given our time in opposition, neither he or I knew quite what to expect. I vividly remember how he shot up from his stool before wielding it like some kind of makeshift weapon. I merely took a seat next to the door, and it ordered us both a drink. We were once enemies, but long before that, we two were great friends, and to my surprise, despite the thousands of years that had passed, there was only more things we now shared in common. Among them, our loss, for he too lost everything he held dear to the very same hand. Artemis had believed that the strength of his kingdom's allies, not necessarily the character, would be the key to ensuring the well-being and longevity of his people. But it was his allies that Hades had turned on first. Their purpose served, their usefulness outlived. It was this mutual grief that initially bridged the distance between us, and from that point forward, little would stop us from our tremendous connection reminded us exactly why we had been such close friends for all those years before. And when our time in that settlement was over, we went off together. We had not discussed any plans to travel together, nor had we needed to. We had foolishly allowed ourselves to be separate for the once, and it was a mistake we vowed to never repeat. As our mortals, we had avoided the fleeting companionship of our more transient kin, becoming content with our solitude and numb to our loneliness. We had become all too familiar with loss, our closest friends growing old and withering away in what seemed like a heartbeat. But with Artemis, for the first time in thousands of years, the person I held most dear was as frozen in time as I was. I needed no restraint, and none was shown as we both felt deeply in love. We had not known better. I'm trying to read, but it's also like, it's late at night, and also it's like, yeah, my ability to read is kind of falling apart. We would have thought we would have been made for one another. In between our intrepid adventures, we had made home for ourselves, nestled deep within the untouched wilderness. It was like a fairy tale come to life, with babbling brooks and wondrous wildlife. Not to mention, the land was perfectly suited to the growing of Artemis's countless medical herbs. We would stop in to supply, crafting an array of medicines and other panacas capable of treating anything from the common cold to a number of lethal afflictions. Artemis even knew the treatment for exposure symptoms, the first and only witch medicine to ever exist. Our supplies replenished, we set out once more, traveling to distant locales and peddling our wares, making quite a name for ourselves as miracle workers along the way. Of course, I could not rightly share the credit. I was little more than a cheerful companion and a helping hand. Having come familiar with our reputation, we would soon cross paths with another of our immortal kin, Dionysus, or Dion in short, another of Artemis's names. Received with such familiar reluctance to my own, it's comparatively adhesive. It was through Dion whom we had learned of Hades' fate. As his conquest was nearing conclusion, his body began to waste away before his very eyes. His immortality collapsed, and with it, his body simply ceased to regenerate. It was quick, perhaps far quicker than what he had served. Nonetheless, neither I nor Artemis were entirely welcoming of this news. After all, if it were to happen to Hades, it would just as easily happen to any one of us. And, as it would happen, neither Artemis nor Drysis knew of any surviving immortals besides ourselves. The three of us were all alone in the world, living with bated breath, fearing for the day of our very own Reaper may yet come knocking. Even though we had anticipated it, nothing could have prepared me for the reality. I had borne witness to countless deaths in my overlong life, from Marsden to the friends and colleagues I had made during my life, but it all paled in comparison to losing the one I had considered my soulmate. We were out on the roads, as we almost always were, trekking the long distances between our many destinations for our first time, when for our first time, my more physically capable companion began to fall behind. At first, we chalked up to the length of our substantial journey, to lack of nutrients, inadequate hydration, anything. But as we arrived at our next destination, he could no longer walk unassisted. We remained optimistic, but as his strength continued to diminish, we knew, reaching out to Dionysus, he arrived in less than a week. Alas, between the three of us, no solution was found. I had lost the man I considered my father. I had lost an entire kingdom, my entire way of life. But even that could not compare to the profound emptiness and unimaginable loss I felt that day, and nothing ever has. I returned to the home we once shared, but it only conjured up unbearable pain. So I retrieved only the most precious of my belongings and abandoned that place, returning once to the road. Among those things were a series of Artemis journals containing the recipes for many of these most brilliant creations, several important souvenirs, and an oil painting of us both, depicting happier times. I wandered the earth countless years, lost my grief as I blindly ventured from place to place, until found my nose to a strangely familiar locale. The place where it all began. Below my feet, remained of the very lab from which all intelligent life had bloomed, the valley below as beautiful as it had been nearly 6,000 years earlier. I made this my new home, building an estate on top of the remains of our Genesis, protecting what little remained, and beginning a new life in this breathtaking place, I guess Woodcrest. It was not long before the small group of settlers would chance upon this place. Despite some reluctance on my part, they quickly became friends whom I would join hands to establish a new settlement of Woodcrest in that very same beautiful valley. And nearly 100 years later, those friends long departed, and invited a new friend to that very same estate. I offered a warm fire to dry the rain-drenched fur, and a mug of hot cocoa to soothe his chills. What say you, friends? With my tale now told, your complex and multifaceted questions now have simple and definite answers. Come. The same door you found ajar in your slumber is now unlocked. You have slept for long enough. It's about time for you to wake up. Question mark? I said, wake up. Well, with that, and us being an hour and 10 minutes over time, I think that's a good time to call it. But was it all a dream? Or was it reality? Who knows? I mean, it would explain why main character son is acting all, all what he's doing. So, that's going to be the end of this Let's Play. A long one. That might be the origin of species, or whatever. So, yeah, that's in the end of this play. So, please, sorry I got hiccups. Please comment, because I like comments. Tell me what you like, dislike, tips, as always. If you like my YouTube and like it grow, then please like, subscribe, and check out the business tab at grow. Please remember to spay new your animals to help control the pet population. And if you want to play this game, it's available free on itch.io. But if you want to support people that make this game and or get the news version earlier, you can go to Patreon, where it's $5 a month, $54 a year. And until next time, let's wait. Me, GamerWolfSix, of Sileo, Tales of a New Dawn, a game about geneticists. Though, before I go, let's see, what other games have done this? There's Space Pause. Spoiler alert for that game. But, the exact thing you could find out. Was there any other games? Well, there's Shelter, which, has a human, which might be something else. I'm just looking through my list of ones. No, I guess it's just those three. Anyways, until next time, me, GamerWolfSix, Sileo. Thanks and see ya.